We're back with our next Republican candidate for governor, Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. He grew up in Jeff City, born into a political family. His dad, John, was governor in the 80s and 90s, eventually becoming U.S. Attorney General. Voters elected Jay Secretary of State twice in 2016 and 2020. And like his opponents, he supports an abortion ban. He's endorsed by Missouri Right to Life. As the state's top election official, though, he's in a unique position, especially considering the petition effort to restore reproductive rights. That's where we start today. It had been reported late last year that you had implied that you would potentially leave the office of governor if the initiative petition on abortion passed. I was curious your take on that and if that still holds up.
Well, I didn't imply that, and I encourage anyone who wants to go back and look at the video. What I was speaking to was I have a problem with elected officials that take an oath of office, and then when they get into office, they say, oh, I can't do that, so it's going to cost the taxpayer more money. I believe you take that oath of office and you have to fulfill that office. If you can't fulfill that office, then of course you'd resign. But I never intimated or said anything that I would resign under that. And of course, if the abortion initiative gets passed, I hope it does not, then I will spend my time fighting to turn back the clock and make sure that we protect all Americans, children, mothers, everyone in this state.
What would an Ashcroft push to reinstate or tweak those rules look like?
I think you would see constitutional amendments then being put before the people to protect life in this state. Look, 51 years ago, the United States Supreme Court said that it's okay to kill a child in the womb. And a lot of people said, well, that's decided. A lot of good people said, no, we're going to do what we can to protect all life in this country, and they've had success. If we're forced to start over again after November this year, I will lead that fight in Missouri.
Do you support abortion in cases of rape or incest?
Look, I believe we need to make Missouri the state where every mother knows whatever she's going through, she has a tremendous future, and that her child can have a tremendous future also.
Yes or no?
Do you believe that people that were conceived through incest are lesser people?
I'm asking you the question.
I'm asking you
Do
you believe that
incest?
people that were conceived through rape are not real people?
I'm just asking because
well,
the candidates have been
Would you answer? Look,
forthcoming
I
on
believe that we need to protect life. I've been endorsed by Missouri Right to Life, and I find it repugnant that you think that someone, just because they were conceived through rape, is not an individual
That's
made
not
in
what
the
I'm
image
saying
of God. Well, I know people that were conceived through rape.
Sure.
I know people that were
Same.
conceived through incest, and they deserve the right to life just like anyone else does.
Does a mother deserve a choice in that case of rape or incest? Well, let me word it that way.
There are two individuals we're talking about.
Okay. You mentioned restrictions on abortion. You say that there would not be regulations. There are strict federal regulations and medical regulations in place. You went to court over the wording of the ballot language for this petition, and when you had written that there were that these were unregulated, unrestricted abortions.
They would be unregulated under that constitutional amendment, and the people that proposed that amendment couldn't even name one health regulation, one regulation designed to protect the health of a mother undergoing an abortion that would be legal under that constitutional amendment. I think the language that I wrote was truthful and honest. It's unfortunate that the Missouri courts decided that they would mislead the people of this state on that. I would invite every Missourian to read the actual language of the proposed constitutional amendment.
You and your opponents have talked about getting rid of the state income tax in Missouri.
Well, and I'm the only one that's actually put forth a plan to do that.
Tell us about it.
I'm glad that they've started talking about that after I started talking about that. We can do that 6 years, 8 years. Best way to look at it is the state government budget has increased by over $20 billion over the last 6 years. The individual income tax in our state, I've been saying $8.5 billion, but I think it actually brought in 8.2 after returns last year, is less than half of that. That just shows that we're wasting money, that we're taking in more money than we need. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. We need to get away from really just saying we're going to have a baseline budget that we're going to increase every several years. Instead, we ought to look at what do we really need. Let's have a zero budgeting baseline that we start with, saying they don't need any, and then you have to prove what you need. Roads, bridges, inland waterways, education, and public safety are core responsibilities of government. Our general revenue should be going to that before we're just raising taxes willy-nilly on the people. Americans and Missourians more specifically, it's hard for them. They're trying to make ends meet. They're having to not enroll their kids in sports or take them to camps or take family vacations because of the cost of gas, because of the cost of food. Why does government keep growing bigger at the expense of the people of this state?
How would this affect education in the state? And what do you think the role of government is in education statewide?
I think the best thing to do with education is to take the money that currently is going directly to schools for children and put those into what I would call a real education savings account, like a health savings account, and let parents control where that money goes. If that local public school is a good school and the right school for their child, to just go ahead and send that money on through as tuition to that school. On a homeschool, parents know their children better than the government bureaucracy ever can. They should be able to use those funds for homeschooling. They should be able to use those funds for private schooling. They should be able to say, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, they're all different. We should be able to make sure that the education provisioning that they're getting meets their children.